Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. Just want to update you on this month's focused charity, which has to do with an event, the 5th annual International Overdose Awareness Day live stream here at The Broken Brain. Will be taking place at the end of the month. And so, therefore, our focused charity is actually International Overdose Awareness Day, which is an international Overdose Awareness Day that's put together actually by the Pennington Institute in Australia, which is a nonprofit focused on different kinds of movements for harm reduction, public health, and other things that have to do with addiction. But they sponsor the International Overdose Awareness Day every year on the 31st of August. If you go to overdoseday.com, you can learn more about that. They have a lot of free resources that you can gain if you would like to promote this and bring awareness to it. There's a couple of things they tell you about if you want to host an event over this month in honor of that, or on August 31st itself. They ask everybody to hang up some purple or turn on a purple light in celebration of that. There's also things that you can, that you can get there. They also have merch and swag and all that kind of stuff that all goes back to the Pennington Institute, which is a nonprofit centered in Australia. Does a lot of good work here at the show. I like to do an annual live stream, which will be happening on Monday, August 31st. Isabel Turan's going to join me, and we are going to be talking about overdose awareness, overdose prevention, addiction treatment, and in particular focusing on health management, and the role that that plays in helping to control and change the direction that are going for overdose and some of the terrible things that addiction can cause. We have in the last few years seen some successes in the United States with some reduction, some interventions in overdose and overdose deaths of different various things. We'll probably get more in the weeds on that throughout the thing, but so ups and downs that we're seeing. And so let's be part of the ups, everybody. You can go to dwighthurst.com/live in order to see the details of that. It'll have the dates and times and all that information, plus links that you can go to watch the event. And also one big old link that says click here to join. And if you click that, you will actually be on the live stream with us. You can jump on and share anything you would like to about any of that stuff we're talking about. All right, well, on with today's episode.
The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's Dwight here with you again as we're looking at the intersection of psychology and culture. And as you know, love it when we're able to see that intersection strike somewhere around art, especially when the art has something to actually do and to have something informed to say about psychology and culture. And this is just a perfect storm of all of those things. I'm joined by a returning guest, returning champion to the show. Jess Wright is coming on today to talk about his new novel, Dance in a Madhouse, which will be coming out September 29th. Previous to this, Jess has come on to talk about his other novel, A Stream to Follow. If you go back in the archives of the episodes, you'll see where we talked about that. And previous to that, he's been on the show before to talk about one of his expertise in cognitive behavioral therapy. He's also an accomplished author and psychiatrist working within the field of treatment and an expert in CBT, as well as many other things. He's a lecturer, presenter, and creator of what is a great new mystery book, which even I think promises, the implication is we might even get a series out of this. And those are all the many, many things I think we're going to talk about today. Jess, thanks for coming back.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a real delight to be here.
One of the things that I love about, other than just you being a cool person, but one of the things I've really enjoyed you sharing is your whole journey of coming through, working as a medical practitioner, becoming a writer in the world of medical education and psychotherapy, I should say, and psychiatry, and then moving into telling these stories that bring psychology into real world applications with people's own journeys. And I should say, these are not stories that are about psychology. They're about people with there are obviously psychological elements, but this is not a story that's like, I'm going to hide psychology in a story. No, these are stories about humans and particularly what they're going through, I should say. But so I've really loved seeing and hearing about your journey becoming an author of fiction. How did that, first of all, how did that start for you, and how did it land you? Your author's notes at the end here have a fascinating thing about how you got to this particular story. So, tell people a little bit about what led you to where you're at now.
Well, I started off being unable to write at all. I might have to admit that. In fact, you've heard about writer's block or procrastination. Like, I was a textbook case of procrastination early in my career as a so-called academic psychiatrist. I eventually became a professor of psychiatry at the University of Louisville. But in the beginning, as a fledgling assistant professor, the old publish or perish adage was really true. And I was struggling big time. I'd done some research as a resident, and I was sitting there in agonizing form trying to get written and on the page. And somehow or another, I figured out a way to get it done. And I think it was, in a way, before I knew much about CBT or met Aaron Beck, the so-called father of CBT. And then I guess I learned how to teach myself a few CBT techniques of getting through it. And then I had decades, really, of writing medical things. And it ended up going pretty well with 8 medical books or self-help books, some of them being bestsellers and winning prizes and things like that. And so I guess my confidence got built up. So I started off with essentially zero confidence as being able to write. And then I got to the point, well, yeah, maybe I could take on this fantasy of writing writing fiction. And it was a new chapter, something that I thought it'd be good to do and fun to do and interesting and something to learn about. So what I did was I looked around for some kind of a course or a teacher or something that would help me make that transition, because I must say I really didn't have the skills. So I was lucky enough to find a New York Times bestselling author who wanted to take me under his wing, and he became my writing coach, and that's been wonderful. Wow. So it's been exciting and very fulfilling. And here I am with my second novel about to be published. And you mentioned a series. Actually, there is a series. So there is a second novel in this. It's called the Owen Townsend Mystery Series. It'll be out in about a year. So it's, I guess it's a going concern now.
Yeah. No, I can see it left me wanting. I mean, it definitely left me wanting to see what happens to Owen next. I know your first novel was the story of a battlefield MD coming back from World War II with his own struggles of PTSD and trying to start his life in peacetime and everything. Now, this is a pivot to, we're seeing, once again, I mean, the character is a doctor, at least a doctor in training. However, he is quickly in the story pulled into a world of both now becoming doctor and patient in a psychiatric facility, and then also being involved in murder mystery is what we're seeing here. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The story came to me through a very interesting route. A friend of mine who's a poet, actually a very fine poet, her name is Margot Taft Stever, asked me to write an introduction to a book of poems that she was publishing. And it turned out that she found some letters from her great-grandfather, who was the brother of William Howard Taft, the President of the United States. And in the letters, she found out that this poor fellow, Peter Taft, who was deep sixed in a mental institution back in the early 1900s, these letters were just beautifully written and lucid and showed no evidence of any kind of psychiatric disturbance. And she began to think that, well, why was he there? Was he there because something odd had happened and he had to be put away because of the shame, if you will, to the President of the United States? Was this an egregious example of stigma? And then she wrote these poems that were based on Peter's letters. They're called found poems, very beautifully written, that exposed some of the really terrible things that happened in psychiatric facilities then. And So I wrote this introduction, and in doing so, I was able to dig up some research. I found the doctor who actually treated Peter Taft. And it turned out that he had written articles in the journal that became the American Journal of Psychiatry, which I published in. So that was sort of a strange thing that here's this
There's a
doctor who
connection.
I'm seeing as evil force who's writing in the same journal that I am,
Colleague,
albeit it was
sort of.
100
Yeah.
150 years later or more. Yeah. And so I got this idea that, well, this is a story that maybe should be told
Mhm.
of someone who's put into an institution against their will and really didn't have a psychiatric illness, and then had to survive somehow in that institution and find a way out. And to make it much more interesting, I concocted a thriller kind of plot where lots of terrible things happen, very scary things, in fact, and lots of the abuses and odd treatments of the time are exposed. And I could pull in some of the early history of psychiatry, which is really the dawn of modern psychiatry, when hypnosis was first used in medical practice. There were no medications yet. There were really no psychotherapies as we know them today, ones that are empirically tested and we know work. So the doctors were, they had their hands tied in trying to help people. But of course, I had to concoct a evil psychiatrist, which was hard for me to do because, I rail against these images in movies and so forth of these horrible psychiatrists. But, for the purposes of the story, I certainly had to have one that was not doing the best work for his patient.
Well, no, isn't it interesting though, too? Yeah, because the same things that can turn people in public sentiment to be like, oh, I don't know about treatment. But a lot of those things also then stem from problems that they're not completely made up, particularly when you go back in time to the history of our field, right? To say, I remember I was reading just some historical account. It was by just a humorist online who writes history articles and things in a funny way or whatever. And he was talking about some old medical procedures. And he said, you have to realize that up until recently, medicine was just a bunch of guys making shit up. And so I think when you go back in time, right, and you're like, wow, there was a lot of control just being placed in the hands of those who were the caretakers. And I felt like by having the protagonist, the Owen, by having him go from being a doctor to now being a patient, like he's seeing both these sides, and all of a sudden he's seeing how he still views himself, but yet seeing how he's viewed by others now that he's in the patient's, but it was particularly as a psychiatric patient, that he is now in this seat. And now he sees both sides of that, but he's being treated by some people as if it's like nothing you ever were before counts. And then others that might say, oh, I'm actually giving you more credit because of who you were, air quoting, were. And it struck me all the way through that there was this like dual identity, and neither one of them which were necessarily 100% based off the merits of him as an individual. That a lot of people are seeing him as like
That's
less
right.
than because he's a
Well,
patient, more than we would as a normal patient because you're also a doctor, but who's really seeing him as a person, right?
yeah, well, you really got one of the points I was trying to make early in the book, that even a physician who's supposedly trying to help the people that she or he treats can have blind spots and biases. And Owen realizes when he gets into this institution that the other patients, in many respects, are more intact and finer people than those that he was associated with that weren't incarcerated behind the walls of this place called Fairmont Lodge, and how he really not understood or had accurate empathy for the people that he was trying to treat in the past. And now he was in a position that, he was being treated as someone who was marginalized and stigmatized and had essentially no future.
And he had, in the story, and I don't think you can stop me if I hit any spoilers. I'm not going to hit any spoilers. This is in the first few pages, but he had just been done being treated for typhoid, being near death, and then had this like kind of psychotic episode, and then is taken away, almost jailed for whatever, his actions, but then put here, and he's told again and again, you should be grateful that you're in treatment instead. They're very so he kind of went from, boy, I am just this, doctor, and I'm out there and I'm kicking ass, to being like, now I'm physically sick and I'm that kind of patient. Now I'm the kind of patient that everybody's like, we'd like to put you here, so maybe we can just kind of forget that you exist. Or that
That's it. That's what happens. And we could think about current society and whether those kinds of things happen to people with psychiatric and psychological disorders, and not as extreme, but it still happens. Even in professionals like you and I, if you have a psychiatric illness, most people try to obscure it. They may not get treatment. They so-called suffer in silence.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem. Absolutely. We see this with medical students and others, doctors that I see in clinical practice. It takes a long time for them to get to treatment, if they even do.
You mentioned one of the things that I thought was a fascinating theme in this book is there's so many people that are in one way or another are in a position where they either, by the nature of their job, like the medical professionals, are there to help, or they have relationships in which they're there to help, or they're there as kind of peers of like, hey, we're patients together, we're trying to help. So it hit me that there were all these different people who had responsibilities or desires to help the other people. And I felt like again and again with so many of them, there was a difficulty in saying, do I want to help somebody, or have I crossed the line to where I'm now doing something I either want to do or I think I should do, and doesn't matter as much if it's really helping them. Like there was the line between wanting to help and wanting to like maybe stroke one's own ego, or even that line of obsession of like, do I want to help or do I want to own? Just where people's intentions or their role of trying to be a helper just kind of goes off the tracks. It seems like that I saw that in a lot of different characters.
Yeah, I tried to create some complex characters. You have to, in a book like this, you have to have a bit of stereotypy. You have psychiatrists that are not doing the right thing, a hero that's going to somehow figure a way out of this terrible dilemma and risk to his life, really, that's going on. But I wanted to create some characters with depth. And as a psychiatrist who's still practicing and seeing people with all kinds of dilemmas, ranging from ones that are really quite severe, being traumatized or having suicidal thoughts or having gone through a psychosis themselves. I think that's given me a bit of a ability to see those things about people and try to put them down on the page. At least that's what I've attempted to do.
Yeah. I found that I always enjoy when there are layered components to people's personalities, because you even mentioned your villainous psychiatrist character or whatever. I didn't get the idea like even he was not through and through like this terrible person, especially as the story goes on, you discover more things about everybody here and there, but it's like nobody came out and was like twirling a mustache or anything like that, which I thought, and I will say my impression, even by the end, it was like there's a lot of very complicated things and complicated people that were allowed to exist, because going back to that shattering that worldview of like, well, here's the healthy people, here's the unhealthy people, and being like, oh, there's actually a lot of complex nuance to who's healthy and who's unhealthy and in which particular ways. And the biggest difference sometimes is who has the power and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really delighted that you spotted that. I'd hope that would get across. Even as you pointed out, the so-called evil psychiatrist has his own layers of vulnerability and goodness in a way, although it ends up with some tragic consequences, unfortunately. There is, again, I don't want to give a spoiler, but hopefully there's some good outcomes with people that show courage and resilience and get through some of these difficult times and survive. But also, I didn't want to just have a feel-good kind of a thing that didn't really show what can happen when these kinds of circumstances occur.
One of the things that really pulled me through the story that kept me like, whoa, hold on, that kind of a feeling that you want to have when you're reading this kind of book was the use of paranoia as a theme. And I will say, did you ever Did you ever read Shutter Island? It was a movie also. They made a
Yes,
movie with
I
Leonardo
did.
DiCaprio, and there was a
Yeah.
thought that I had as I was reading this book is I was like, because of course, for those out there who don't know, Shutter Island is the story ostensibly of a murder investigation in a asylum on an island, and everything's crazy. And Leonardo DiCaprio, well, in the movie, that's not the character's name in the book. Anyway, he is investigating this murder. And then, and here's a spoiler alert. Everyone can skip forward a minute or so if they want to, if you want to go watch the movie or something or read the book. He finds out he's actually one of the patients, and that he's going through some both psychosis and also some kind of learning exercise and everything. It's one of those great twist endings. But the thing that when I read that book, I was like, really good. Dennis Lehane, great author. But I kind of wanted I kind of wanted to be like, I wish the end had been, as I often do, like maybe mid-second act. And then let's go on from there and kind of see, now that I know this guy's a patient, I'd kind of like to see how is someone with his kind of brain functioning in the society as a patient. That was, all of a sudden it was either, I kind of wanted that to be even act one. I was like, I want to know what happens next. And so as I was reading your book, I was like, this in a way is like-ish to that, where it's like, oh, I know who he is. He knows that he's in a spot. He knows he's a patient, and he's now investigating. It was exactly kind of what I wanted after I read Shutter Island. So
I'm glad.
I should bookend them, and just that's my headcanon.
Yeah. There's a question embedded in it: is what is sanity?
Exactly. Yes. That's what, because you see paranoia woven through, where everyone's like, "Oh, you're paranoid," and I wouldn't say that Owen's not paranoid. But at the same time, the question then becomes, is it paranoia if it's true? And then how true does it have to be before it's just thinking stuff? I'm curious about the role paranoia. How you used paranoia with the characters in the story?
Right. Well, I did want to create that question about when is paranoia true, and how can you tell when it's a problem, a psychiatric problem. And there are real questions here about many of the characters, even Celeste, who's a very traumatized young woman who appears in the book. And there's some heat eventually between Owen and Celeste, which is somewhat controversial, I would think, about whether that was the right thing for Owen to do or not, or Celeste.
When you have these two people that are both patients that are falling in love with each other, essentially,
both wounded.
Right.
Is this good for them, or what's going to come of all this?
And then seeing where, because it is interesting how I noticed that paranoia was in the system that was established, where there's those that are kind of in charge and those that aren't. So, providers and patients, but whatever. That seemed to be one of the biggest power differentials, was if you are the person who's up here and who's in charge, you can say, I can dismiss whatever you say. And paranoia is one of the biggest columns I can throw it under. I believe there's even a part in the story which this rang true for me for so many clients of mine that I've worked with in therapy over the years, who have told stories about bringing something to someone in authority, particularly someone who controls maybe even their freedom or their medical management. And in the story, Owen brings a letter which kind of proves a point he's trying to make, that he's not delusionally paranoid about something, brings it to the psychiatrist at the facility, and the guy goes, well, blah, blah, blah. And he has to fight with him to even get him to read the letter from another physician before he'll evaluate. And then when he does that, completely changes, we have to evaluate this now. And I just thought about how many times is it like, hey, could you read this? Yeah, sure. I don't know if they did. I think they threw it away. I don't know where it is now, and no one cares, and,
right.
And I just, that really mirrored what I think a lot of people's experiences are of not being listened to in an important situation, right?
Part of this characterization came out of, I think, my work in writing about and doing treatment with people with psychotic illnesses. So one of my medical books is titled Cognitive Behavior Therapy for Severe Mental Illness. And in it, I do videos and discuss how one can engage somebody that does have hallucinations and delusions. And the key principle there is listening and not immediately positioning yourself like the person in authority who is not going to believe it no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to start from a position of, this is in clinical work, position of accepting what the person's saying and checking it out and testing it. And indeed, sometimes you find out that some of these things have some basis.
Well, that's an interesting thing that I think that people of all different types of mental illness find that oftentimes people in their lives, even friends or family or partners, will sometimes dismiss their opinions, their preferences, their fears, their desires. It's easy to dismiss that if you throw it under that heading of like, well, can you really make that decision by yourself? Are you really? Okay, you're worried about this. Oh boy, here we go. And it's like, not everything I think is mentally ill. Not everything. I mean, not everything I think is because I'm delusional. Even if I have a psychotic disorder. Yeah.
Well, I'd hope that readers would, as they go through this, think about themselves and how much of a grip they have.
Yeah.
And how much they understand other people that have gone through crises like depression or anxiety or even a psychotic illness.
Well, and even
better
though
understanding of it.
Yes, and even though Owen, of course, is the protagonist in this like detective-driven kind of thing, he of course is insightful, and he's gonna, find it's that pattern of the story where it's like we're with him, we believe him and stuff. But I also thought it was good that like he's not always correct with his his fears, anxieties, or paranoias or whatever. They're not delusional. At the same time, they're not all cogent or correct either. Not everything he thinks is true, which I thought that was a good kind of balance to throw in there,
Yeah.
I wonder too, when you are writing a story like this and kind of connecting this then with people who are going through this kind of thing in real life, you mentioned listening as a tool, but what kind of things do you think are important for people when they themselves are trying to sort out, like, I'm feeling picked on, no one's listening to me, they're telling me I'm crazy. At the same time, I know not everything that I'm seeing and experiencing is actually real, and I'm trying to get through to people. But what do you see that helps people with that? People who are maybe sort of in Owen's position, maybe without all the murders.
Yeah, one of our key principles in CBT is, of course, examining the evidence, of looking at it in the cool light of day as much as you can to disengage your reasoning from intense emotion that's driving the reasoning. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if someone was really very critical to you, at least you perceived that, and you felt shame and embarrassment and maybe some anger, and all these feelings are swirling around trying to figure out what this person is really trying to get across to you. If you can somehow step back from that a bit and try to think it through as carefully as you can, piece it together before you jump to a conclusion or you have a kind of a knee-jerk reflex in how to respond to it. Of course, we try to do that in therapy when we work with patients, try to teach them those skills, try to take a little emotional heat off and think it through and try to make the best decision you possibly can. Of course, sometimes people are really insulting you or they're really trying to hurt you, or in Owen's case, in the book, do you in. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, then you need to figure out how you're going to respond to that. You just can't sleep underneath the carpet. But it is teaching things like errors in logic and how to listen into your so-called automatic thoughts. That's a concept from cognitive behavior therapy. The thoughts that just pop into your mind, and maybe you don't give them as good an analysis as you might, and then jump to a conclusion and get into more trouble than you might otherwise.
And that
might be good.
Yeah, that kind of, and it's a good life skill is to keep that concept in mind that our feelings and our thoughts are not always correct, right? Basically, they do not always reflect reality. They're important and they're worth examining. And I think that's where in therapy we'll talk about, well, why do we feel this way or that way? But they don't all they don't all come from an accurate representation of what is happening. And I think that is something that most people experience. The difference of whether or not they kind of have to figure that out is oftentimes the stakes. In other words, if someone doesn't have a high degree of like suicidality, if they're not healthy, if they don't have like audio or visual hallucinations, if they haven't lost a string of relationships and jobs and careers to illness, mental illness, they just may wander around and kind of be unaware and sort of like whatever level of misery that causes, they just don't have to address it. If that makes sense. I feel that way a lot.
Sure.
That sometimes like all of us could benefit from saying, yeah, I really think that about so-and-so. They hate me. Do they really hate me? Why am I acting like they do? I mean, where'd that come from? You know, can I actually figure out more information and evidence of whether or not I'm right about that? Or do I just write them off forever? And that's that relationship gone. Yeah.
Well, if you're fortunate, you have trusted friends, partners, people that you can talk with that may help you, get a grounding in, what's really going on here. That can really be helpful, and sometimes have a therapist. Mm-hmm. If you think that it's needed. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that sense of community and being able to have people you trust who are going to listen, that's very valuable when you're trying to ground into reality. And I think it seems like something that you captured here, this facility, like the Owen goes to right away when you're going to somewhere like that. And I should add, this is not a facility we really see nowadays. This is like pre-deinstitutionalization. This was the kind of place people could just stay forever, theoretically.
Right. You could live your life there.
Yeah, exactly. It could be like, we don't think you're better. You don't get to go, And so the first thing that does is that strips away any sense of community, because anybody I really even know is barely even allowed to visit me. And that's all up to the doctor anyway. And so I don't know anybody here and nobody knows me. And so how do I find trusted community to be grounded if it's like I don't know if I trust the medical professionals, and I don't really know if I trust the health of the patients who are maybe also, they're also though the ones that I am peers with who do listen to me and give me some respect. And so how do I know? And Owen has to kind of build I got the sense of that kind of building a list of not just who can I trust. It was even more basic. It's like, how much can I trust this one over that one and in what areas? That's at the same time that I'm going through maybe the biggest crisis of my life. Yeah. I wondered about the role that the police inspector who comes in when there is this is the first death that happens. There's a police investigation and then a police presence pretty frequently, and the relationship that kind of blooms. This detective seems to pick up the fact that Owen is not out there as much as maybe other people think he is. That he's like, there's something going on here that I kind of am finding trust in this patient, this Owen Townsend, and forming that. How did you, what role did that friendship, that acquaintanceship play in how you were trying to tell the story?
Well, that's a really good observation about the trust that somehow Owen needed to get, because he starts that hospitalization very much alone, completely cut off from everything he knew, from his fiance, from his family, from his career. He's an intern and he's ripped away from that, and he has essentially no future. And there are all these other people in this hospital who are pretty wounded themselves, and can they be trusted? Mm-hmm. And then this police inspector comes in, and Owen's the prime suspect. Did he set the fire that kills the doctor on the first night he's there? Are some of the other terrible things that are happening really coming from Owen? Or is Owen the victim? And in the beginning, Broombaugh, who's the police inspector, who's sort of a Pennsylvania Dutch kind of a crusty old guy.
I caught that. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so
did you?
You and I, we know.
I grew up in Pennsylvania too, so right. I picked up on that.
Yeah.
So Broombaugh is the enemy, but after a while, Broombaugh figures out that Owen's on the inside of this place now, and maybe he's a sharper observer and more trustworthy than any of the other patients. So Broombaugh begins to use him in a way, and Owen recruits Broombaugh, and they become a team by the end of the novel. And you mentioned a sequel in a series, and it turns out that Owen and Broombaugh are the chief
I was
investigator
hoping. I
team
was hoping
in the
Broomba was going to be
second
in the next one.
novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's called Dance on the Edge,
Okay.
and it's finished, and it's going to be out in about a year.
Hopefully we'll be talking about it then.
I'd like
I'll
to.
have you
Yeah.
back doing that. No, I felt like one of the things that this is a first person story. You can so we're aware of Owen's perspectives and Owen's thoughts, and one of the things that's always fascinating is the way that a character describes things as well as their thought process. And one of the things that struck me about Owen is that he consistently sort of views the world diagnostically. Like he seems like he's really thinking like a doctor, and it seems to me that that is both what helps him in his adventures, but also is one of the things that sometimes gets him in trouble because he's trying to act like he's still a doctor. And the way he sees things, people don't always like it. This works very well if you're making friends with a policeman who also is thinking about things investigatively and breaking
Right.
it down. But other people around may be like, I don't like that you're doing that. I don't like how you're looking at things, especially when we've already told you how you're supposed to think and feel.
Yeah, it does get him into some trouble.
Um,
Would it be okay if we talked a bit about the title, which I think is
Please do.
something
Yes,
that
I
might
was curious about that.
people might have some questions about?
Yeah.
Why would I cook up this title, Dance in a Madhouse? And what indeed is a dance in a madhouse? Could there be such a thing? Well, it turns out that they actually did have dances in madhouses back when this story took place. And it was chronicled in a famous lithograph by George Bellows, who's, well, I think he has a pretty good reputation as an American painter. His work is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the National Gallery of Art and so forth. And this lithograph titled Dance in a Madhouse, which depicts what was called at that time a lunatic ball. I hate even to use the words because they're so stigmatizing. And part of
Be
me
a great
didn't want to
band
use,
name, though, I think, depending on the genre of music. Lunatic Ball.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, go.
part of me didn't even want to use this title, Dance in a Madhouse, but I thought it was authentic to the time. What happened during these lunatic balls were that the people that were committed to the institution would have a dance. They dance with one another, but townspeople could come in and observe, if you will. But
This
really,
was
they were
wild
gawking at
to
it.
me. Yeah, tell everybody about this, what this was.
Yeah, so it's something where it was like a party for the people that came in from the town. They were, making fun of the patients that were dancing. And in the novel, in one of the early chapters, there's a dance, and Owen, in his first night there, is observing what's going on, and he's just horrified by what's happening, and horrified by the reaction of the townspeople that are watching this. And it's all very apparent to him, but it's not apparent to the people that have been in that institution for a while because they've been institutionalized.
Right.
And for them, it's just a ordinary kind of business.
Yeah, this
But
is
when
what
this
our
fire
dances
breaks
are
out,
like. Yeah.
all hell breaks loose. And
Yeah.
so it becomes really a metaphor, this dance in a madhouse, for the mistreatment and misunderstandings that occurred then. And hopefully we've come reasonable distance from there, but not as far as we might. But it's also a metaphor for the dances between Owen and Broombaugh, and Owen and the psychiatrist Fletcher, Owen and Celeste, who's the woman who's quite wounded, and there's a relationship that builds. And these are like dances that might occur where there's back and forth, and what's really happening here. So I decided to name this whole series. They all have dance in the title. So the next one is Dance on the Edge.
I like because the dancing metaphor, you look at, I see how if we pick on like Owen as a protagonist, he's dancing through all of these relationships you mentioned, and they all have their own different way of interacting with, and it seems to me that one of the things that strikes him is the sort of vastly different, not just the different kinds of people, the different rules of how people interact with each other. He's pretty much come from a background where he grew up in a wealth and privilege background. He is just the fact that he's the black sheep of the family because he decided to become a doctor and they're looking down on that. So I think that tells us a little bit about the family he's coming from. That, you know, this is not a very probably diverse society
this is
that
a Fortune 400 New York
Right.
family in the time of the Vanderbilts and so forth. So they're wealthy, and
like one of the
privileged.
top, whatever they call it, the top families back then or something,
Right.
the family money kind of families, right? And so coming into this, it was interesting to see how he now had to play by all these different rules, not just societally being a patient, but also saying, oh, this, you know, here's a person over here who seems to have some empathy. Here's a person over here. Here's this person who is a mental patient, but yet we're having this vibe, you know, with Celeste, that they're having this thing. And like, oh, wait, am I looking at her as a whole person, and how that is a different way to look at her than to just say, who's that crazy person dancing in the corner, like maybe the townspeople are saying when they come in. And just all of these different mechanisms of these relationships and how they work. One thing that I thought was very interesting is, once again, with the detective, with Inspector Broombaugh, it made sense to me. And I think this is always tricky when people are writing stories, especially when you're matching up a detective duo. A lot of, you know, when we're reading this kind of thing, we just take for granted that it's like, oh, this is going to be, this team up kind of a thing.
Right.
And I think a lot of us are ready to forgive a lot when it comes to that and say, cool, they found each other. In your case, though, so I think it's hard to find a way that is clever and makes sense enough that we don't have to suspend too much disbelief to say, I believe that they would work together. One of the ways that felt real to me in the way you wrote these characters is that even though here they are with very, very different backgrounds, we don't know a ton about Broombaugh, but I'm guessing his family's not from any kind of, you know, not at all the same. So they come from these vastly different life experiences, but pretty early on, they connect on a couple of things. There's a interest in honesty, like Owen at one point when they're first talking decides, essentially, screw it, I'll just tell him this. I didn't want to. And then he says, yeah, I don't want to tell you this, but I'll tell you this, which is not advisable to say to a policeman, by the way. Your lawyer wouldn't tell you to do that. And then Broombaugh is like, yeah, I knew that already, but I kind of wondered if you'd tell me. And they start connecting on these little things. Mm-hmm. They both have the same reaction to the gawkers who come into the dance. There were these little things, these little breadcrumbs along the way that I was like, these two guys have a lot in common, even though they would never meet each other without these very specific circumstances. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it made me buy into it. but creating these two different characters that a lot of their, would you say a lot of their basic personality traits they seem to have in common. And I was wondering how was that, trying to bring them together in this weird circumstance?
Well, I saw them as needing to test one another. Mm-hmm. You know, could they be trusted? Could they form a team to solve this dilemma or this puzzle, which was very puzzling, to say the least, and what's really going on here in this facility. And I thought that Broombaugh had enough interesting twists to his character that he might be somebody that Owen might find appealing in a way.
They both were kind of mold breakers in their own worlds.
Yeah, Broombaugh has his own problems. Mm-hmm. He's lonely. He's been shot up pretty badly. He has chronic pain. And life is not going perfectly for him either. And I think that they form a friendship, and I think they enjoy spending their time together. Of course, Broombaugh wants Owen to be drinking with him and so forth, and doesn't do it. But,
right.
Taking a hit of an opioid, but he doesn't do it.
Right. He's carrying for what at the laudanum, right?
Laudanum, yeah.
Sure.
Old-fashioned opioid.
Yeah. I'd never considered carrying a flask of laudanum before, but now that's in my head after reading the story. I don't think I can get a hold of one though. But no, well, exactly. There is what I felt like was that Broombaugh at some point was like, oh, I can actually trust this guy, and I got that feeling that maybe he too was someone who didn't have a lot of people he could just, like, he probably wouldn't have just told anybody, yeah, I'm drinking on the job, my leg hurts. He might not have just told anybody that. And to be himself around someone, and here's this peculiar type of relationship where they both see something maybe odd about each other, as you put it. They don't quite fit into their own respective worlds. and this weird circumstances they bumped into each other. Yeah. I did also want to ask you about the use of fire. There's there part of the mystery is who's setting fires, right? Who's the first victim is killed by a fire, and then there are some fires throughout the story. And I was curious about that, why you went to the inclusion of fire.
Well, I'm not sure where that came from. Maybe I'll just mention a bit about how I write and how I construct these things.
Yeah.
I start with trying to get an idea that I think is somewhat fresh and interesting and would intrigue me, that I'd like to read about this. And then I spend some time trying to figure out a story that would be intriguing enough to construct a whole novel around it. I run that by my coach, and we spend a lot of time just chewing on it a bit. Maybe, the coach and I are sort of like Owen and Broombob, because he's in his 30s and I'm way older, and he's an accomplished best-selling author, and I'm just struggling and trying to get into it. So there's all kinds of role reversals there.
There you go.
I've been
He's
around
always
long
trying
enough.
to get you to drink laudanum. No, I'm
yeah, right. Yeah, so we spend a fair amount of time chewing on that. But then when I have this outline, once I get into it, there's a sort of a creative process that doesn't occur when I'm trying to write medical books and scientific articles and so forth. They're very cut and dried, kind of straightforward. I'm looking for references and trying to make clear points and make it unassailable kind of thing. But when I get into it, stuff just begins to happen. And when I constructed this, the whole idea of how much fire would play into it was not there. But then the heat, the passion, the danger evolved as I got into it.
That makes sense.
And then I also began to think, and it's way back in my memory, were these stories of terrible fires in psychiatric hospitals. I don't know if you recall that Scott Fitzgerald's wife Zelda died in a fire in a mental institution, and
I did know
she
that,
had
actually. Yeah.
He was usually attracted to her, and she was very much psychiatrically disturbed and was in and out of hospitals. And she died in, I think it was called the Highland Hospital or something like that, down in Asheville, North Carolina.
And I don't know the
died.
circumstances, but yeah, she died. So it was in a fire there. I knew that.
Yeah, and then I went through, did some other research and found out that fires in mental hospitals were very common, and have been recent ones. One in Russia recently that claimed a lot of lives, including some of the doctors and the nurses. And I thought that it was a plausible thing that could happen, and that there were characters in this story who had reasons or possible reasons to want to cause harm and could do it. And there would be real questions about who was really at fault, who did this, who was the arsonist. And you don't find out until the end. And then there's all kinds of twists at the end about who's the arsonist.
Yeah. And there's even reactions to the facts as they come out and things, which I thought that was another thing kind of kept me pulled in, where I was like, oh, they found out something. Yeah. It's not the thing I thought they would, or and then it kind of leads to the next. And all along the way, one of the thoughts I always find it interesting of why people make decisions. And there's a lot involved kind of below the surface of why people are doing what they're doing. And in this kind of story, you never know who has ulterior motives and who has this or whatever. But so I found that to be very interesting, the way that you would reveal. It's like, oh, well, this person, we know what they did, but why did they do that? And what's going on with them, and what connection? And kind of goes back to your dance metaphor, I guess, too, of like, well, they stepped that way. Why did they do that? And what are they trying to accomplish? That's one of the things that I think is a good part of mystery, is trying to figure out what it is people actually want in addition to what they're doing. Kind of thing. Yeah.
I might make another observation about the writing process and writing a mystery. And when you get into these things, sometimes I'm not sure. In fact, many times I'm not sure how it's going to turn out.
So, that's an interesting thing. You don't go backwards from, here's the killer, now I'll decide how to hide it. Or
I think
do you
some
know who it's
writers
gonna
do
be?
that. Some writers of thrillers and
I
mysteries
guess.
will
I'm
do
not
that.
sure. Yeah.
And I sort of had an idea, but as I got into it, there were all kinds of possibilities.
Hmm.
And of course, there's a mystery of how am I going to do this and keep the reader fascinated and turning pages and want to find out what's happening because I want to know what's going to happen too.
Yeah.
So I keep an open mind to some extent about how things might turn out.
Well, and the use of paranoia helps with that, I think, as you go through, because you're not sure which things are actually, at some point, Owen's not even sure if he can trust himself and his memory of like which things.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Well, it's out there and it's coming out, as we said, September 29th. The book is, of course, A Dance in, there we go, Dance in a Madhouse. I was adding extra words. Needed to make sure I had the real cover in front of me. Dance in a Madhouse. And you mentioned that there's, of course, some other things coming out. Where, first of all, is there a better than other place for people to get the book, or just where can they get it? And where can they follow your ongoing efforts and work?
Well, I have a website that you're always welcome to take a look at. It's jesswrightmd.com. I'm on Facebook at Jess Wright Author. I'm on Instagram at JessWrightMD. I don't do much anymore with X, but Facebook and
no,
Instagram.
good people do. No, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people
I have
stay
trouble.
off of X.
I look at it occasionally, but you won't pick up anything from me on X on this book.
No, I look
you
at
can
X
get the
until
book,
I get sad, which usually is not very long, and then I get off of it.
You can get the book at Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Your local bookstore may have it, or they could order it. It's so you can buy it right now. It's going to be, you're purchasing it in advance. The book's got some great reviews so far. Got a starred review in the Library Journal, and it's the early advanced praise has been great. So I'm hoping that it'll get out there and people will enjoy it and get something out of it. I meant it to be a thriller that you'd want to turn pages on, like I mentioned, but also wanted to say something about culture and society and psychology and something about courage and resilience. So those things are in the book also.
Yeah, well, I think it definitely does that. Absolutely. It touches on all those things and makes you want to keep, and made me want to keep going after, which thankfully I get to, because I can now dance on the edge once that is coming. And one thing too, when people are out there, if you go, little things that we can do if we're supportive of artists that we want to support is if you do a pre-order, and if you happen to drop a good rating on Goodreads or Amazon or whatever, especially on Barnes & Noble or Amazon where they sell those things, the only reason I throw that out there is people, it's same with films. As I've had filmmakers and authors come on, I've learned that it doesn't take as many as you'd think for it to make a noticeable difference in how often this will show up in people's suggested, you want to read this kind of things. And so as people are getting into anyone they'd like to support, and I would suggest that Jess is someone you should, then make sure that you're taking the extra 20 seconds to, click, review this and whatever, and it may help it to spread more than you think it would. So,
thank you. That's a great suggestion, and I would appreciate any mentions or reviews on Amazon or Goodreads or wherever else you could place one of these.
Well, Jess, thank you so much, and I'm already excited for what I'm sure will be our next interview, if not before then, when your next book comes out.
Well, thank you, Dwight, and thank you for reading the book in such depth and coming up with these wonderful questions. So you made me think and puzzle a bit about how to answer, and that's always good. So thank you.